Today, I would like to welcome Senator Carol Blood to the Deep Power podcast. Senator Blood started her career as the executive director of the La Vista Area Chamber of Commerce. She then started her own business consulting company called Blood Business Consulting, where she helped small and medium-sized businesses gain the tools they needed to grow. She's been a business specialist for the Nebraska Self-Employment Services. She was the at-large representative for the Bellevue, Nebraska City Council, the chair of the Bellevue Public Safety Foundation, when she then became a state senator for Nebraska District 3. Senator Blood, welcome to our podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. We're excited to be able to talk to someone in public office. But before we jump in, I have to tell you that every year my brothers and I go to a college football game somewhere in the country. And I haven't spent much time in Nebraska, but I have to admit, we went to Lincoln not knowing what to expect. But, after 90,000 people come, they played the University of Wisconsin. So it was a fairly big rivalry. But it was such a fantastic experience. The people were amazing. I mean, Nebraska loves its football, especially, University of Nebraska. So I just said that's my one experience, and we're now converted Husker fans because it was so much fun.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad your experience was a good one. There's a reason they say Nebraska nice. It's a nice place to live and raise your family.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'd love to learn a little bit more about yourself. I mean, tell me about you, your family, your kids, career, just to give our audience a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure, I can do that. So clearly my name is Carol Blood, and I'm currently a Nebraska state senator. I serve District 3, which are parts of Bellevue and Papillion, Nebraska. Bellevue being the third largest city in Nebraska, which isn't saying much, but the third largest city in Nebraska. My husband Joe and I have been married for 36 years. We have 3 adult children and 10 amazing, soon to be 11 grandchildren. I grew up on a farm in central Nebraska, so I'm very different than a lot of senators in the body, where I have had experience in both urban and rural. We still have a family farm in Clay County, and that's also in central Nebraska. I have known since 4th grade that I wanted to be a Nebraska state senator.
Mm.
I don't know about other states, but Nebraska, your 4th grade social studies tour, you get a tour of the Capitol.
Wow.
And you get to sit in the balcony and watch the legislature. And I remember deciding at that moment I wanted to be a state senator.
How cool.
And I can remember being very excited when I got back to the farm, because I signed up for legislative updates, and I would get those weekly. That was, I'm in my 60s, so we didn't have the internet. And so I would run to the mailbox and get my legislative update and try and figure out what was going on. And then I got really tickled when I was home on a snow day one time and found out that public television also televised the legislature.
Oh my.
So I was able to watch it and try and figure out what's going on. And so I have known for a very long time that I wanted to be a state senator. And for me, the one thing that I've always done before I became a senator is, I know it always sounds hokey, but I really mean this when I say this, is that I truly believe one person can and does make a difference. And I've got decades of examples. If I want to see change, I have to be part of that change. And so I have volunteered for a lot of events and activities and nonprofits and causes. I'm always, when my kids were in grade school, which was decades ago, they would want to send the kids door to door selling cookies or whatever. And I'm like, why don't you just let me give you one fundraiser and we'll make all the money in one night. I don't want to bake cookies. And I think it's ridiculous to have our kids out knocking on doors. And so I would be the parent that would say, I'll put together a fundraiser and let's raise that money and let's do a one-time thing. I tend to be independent in that way, only because I'm the type of person that's like, why have 10 meetings when you can have one meeting? Let's just get it done. Let's pull the Band-Aid off and move forward. And that has served me really well. Because of that, I have a lot of great friends and a lot of great contacts that when I need to do something or help somebody, I can pick up the phone and say, hey, it's Carol, and I need to help this person. They just got kicked out of their house, or their utilities got shut off, or let's go bring them groceries. It helps me create a village of people who care. So it's been very beneficial for me. But to be really honest, running for the legislature wasn't something that was in the cards for me when my kids were younger. It was hard enough to work full time and raise a family and do it well. And I'm not even sure, I'm sure I'm like a lot of parents, I'm not sure how well I did it. I did my best. Um, but I was working from home as a consultant, and I would have public access television on in the background. I like noise when I work. And I remember myself listening to the Bellevue City Council meetings, and I would turn around and yell at the TV. Like, what do you mean you don't have a strategic plan? You're the third largest city in Nebraska. What do you mean you don't know which roads you're going to fix next year? Like, it was clear to me that they were just writing checks. And that's what, when you don't have a strategic plan, that's what you're doing at a municipality, right? You're just writing checks. And I was like, well, my kids are older now. I think my youngest was in high school. And we're a Dillon's Rule state in Nebraska. So a Dillon's Rule state, for those that may not know what that means that your political subdivisions, your municipalities, your counties, your school boards really can't function, can't do anything that isn't put into state statute. So that's pretty powerful. And I thought, well, if I could get on the city council, I would learn so much more about state statute and be a better senator, maybe be able to hit the ground running. So I had 7 people in my primary, 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And I was one of the 2 Democrats, and won my primary, got outspent 5-1, but won the general election. And then I served 8 years on the Bellevue City Council. And then to serve in the legislature, I beat an incumbent who also outspent me, and was happy enough, thrilled to win re-election. And I am going into my 8th year in 2024. So, and to be really frank, it did serve me well to be on the city council, because I had a clear understanding how state statute worked. And unlike a lot of freshman senators, I was able to bring bills to the legislature as opposed to having somebody in my ear tell me what I needed to do. Most new senators are very dependent on their staff. Before I even stepped foot in my office, I had all my bills turned in, all of them drafted, ready to sign on the first day of session before I even set my butt in my office. So it was kind of great. And that's not to brag, that's to say I prepared. It made me a better state senator. It also makes me a more reasonable senator. And that's, I think, nowadays is going out the window. And I'm hoping we talk a little bit about that too, because I think it's affecting how we do policy. So that was a long about me, but that's kind of who I am.
That's awesome. What a wonderful story. I mean, how cool is that you could have an experience as a 4th grader that you knew what you wanted, and then, the vision came through manifestation, a lot of hard work and just years of trying. And, for kids these days, it's not often that you can say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then you be that. That's an amazing story. And thank you for sharing. And it's clear that, to get to where you are today, you can't get the support you need to be elected in any role without, one, knowing people trusting you, people feeling like they can count on you. Because money can sometimes sway that, but if people don't have good, positive experiences with those they elect, they never get elected. So it's clear that along that path, you really have impacted people's lives. And from what I researched, it seems like your efforts, your bills, the things you focus on really have been about the people and not corporations. And one of your sayings that I saw on one of the websites was, it's not about the Republican way, it's not the Democrat way, it's about the Nebraska way. I love what that I think that means. I'd love to hear from you what that means, because that's a pretty powerful statement.
Sure. I mean, my running joke is that in the body of the legislature, I'm on the island of lost toys. I don't really fit in anywhere. I am a Democrat, but I'm a Democrat in a highly Republican area, to be very frank. But one of the things that has gnawed at me for at least a decade is the fact that we've become so polarized. And if you look at it historically, if you do your research, you'll see that that started really intensely about 20 years ago. And to be really frank, it was the Republican Party that started it. And instead of running on pillars, which they used to always do, like you always need to count on them to lower your taxes and protect our veterans and family values, it was always the same four pillars no matter what you were running on. And then those pillars became, we hate Democrats. And then the Democrats, who were also at fault, said, you know what? We hate you too. We're late to the table and we don't have a plan, but we hate you too. And so then words started coming up like liberal or flaming liberal or conservative, far right, far left. We started labeling everybody. And the reason I believe that they're labeling everybody is because if they keep us apart, we can never come together. And so the more they polarize us, the more they can push through the culture war legislation because they keep a certain demographic in fear. And that demographic comes to the poll. And then they never really have to do their jobs either. I mean, you think about what do they always say? We're going to lower your taxes. Well, I don't know about where you live, but no matter what bills get passed, our taxes really never get lowered. And it's always things that are very, we want you to get a tax relief, but we want you to have to ask for it. Because if you ask for it, then you know who gave it to you. It can't be passive like circuit breaker bills or things that happen automatically. Like everything is very strategic to keep you on one side or the other and to keep you dependent on the hate. And that drives me insane. I try, and you saw if you've been researching me, I try not to use the words that are meant to pull us apart. So I don't say things like moderate, I say reasonable. This is a reasonable person who's taking in the data, who's taking in the information, and who is willing to use data, facts, and science. You'll hear me say that a lot in debate. Data, facts, and science. Just because you found it on the internet doesn't make it true. And someone needs to teach you how to do a proper search on the internet if that's where you're going to get your information. Because some of the stuff that people say on the mic during debate is ridiculous. Like if you hear it, you know it's ridiculous. And you don't even have to look it up to know that they did a bad search to get their information. Some of it's just common sense. So when I say it's not the Republican way, the Democratic way, it's the Nebraska way, that goes back to my roots. Where I grew up at, if you came in off the farm and went to the coffee shop with the other farm families, and you get that cinnamon roll the size of your head, and the folks get coffee and they start talking back and forth. They never said, those darn Republicans, those darn Democrats, or the language that we're hearing now. It wowould be, what's Jim Exon going to do for the farmers this year? What am I going to get for my crops this year? Are we going to have flooding? Are we going to have drought? What's going on, and how is our government addressing it? And we've lost that. We've lost that common sense, compassion for your neighbor type of feeling. I don't know what it's like in other states, but it's something I never thought I'd see in Nebraska. And I got to be really frank with you. I can't even tell you what my party platform is because I don't care. I don't care what my platform is. I care about, and you've seen the legislation that I've pushed forward, I care about my constituents. The vast majority of the bills that I pass are to solve problems that someone's brought forward to me. I've had more bills passed for veterans than any policymaker in the body, and that's because in my district, I have more veterans than any other district in the state. I'm right next to Offutt Air Force Base. I know who I work for, but we're becoming the minority. And it scares the heck out of me. Where in our state, we have some big family money. Our previous governor was a multimillionaire. They owned Chicago Cubs, Ameritrade. And when things didn't go the way he liked in a session, he put lots of money into people's campaigns to get the people that voted against certain things that he wanted them to vote for. He got them out of office. Like he used his wealth to take away our voices as a voter. Now we have another millionaire governor. And now we have We're lacking transparency. They're trying to take away all the tools that allow us to be transparent and accountable to the public. So we're going in a direction that is not how Nebraska has been in the past. That is not going to be to the benefit of the voters. It's going to be to the benefit of the wealthy and special interest. And that's not how democracy is supposed to work. And I am scared for our voters. I am scared for our taxpayers. And I am concerned about the young generation who's seeing this, who are going to be driving our economy in the next decade.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you bring up a really
So,
good point. I mean, I think today's modern younger generation isn't defined by a two-party system. It's a lot more complicated.
absolutely.
And and it's more issue based, and people can be all over the spectrum on different issues. But I agree, it's kind of an old archaic way to say you believe in something like that. But and I agree, the younger the generations I'm talking to, they just scratch their head and like, that's dumb. Why would we ever believe in just one way or another? It's a complicated set of issues that you can have lots of opinions on, right? So I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate the Nebraska way, and I agree that's how people used to do it, and it would be great if that's how it was done.
And some of us, I've always been a Pollyanna. I believe that if you preach it, even if you talk to one or two people at a time, that you can make it better. And it's going to take time, but I always tell, when people are angry and attacking another senator, and that senator will complain to you, I always say, we've lost the art of listening first to understand,
Mhm.
where you extend grace and you say to that person, you're obviously angry, or we obviously disagree on this issue, and I want to understand where you're coming from. So can you kind of walk me through why you believe what you believe and kind of where it's coming from? Because I want to understand it better. And then here's where I personally think that we're making a mistake. Then we think it's our job to shove our opinion down their throat. And it's not. It's more powerful if we listen to them, even if we disagree with them, even if we're appalled by what they have to say, because that gives us power, because then we know where they're coming from, right? We know where they're coming from, and then we can use that to move things forward. Like, I understand that you fear this, or I understand that you don't agree with this. I think we can fix it by doing this. Because you've told me what your issues are. I I That's the hardest thing, especially with social media.
Yeah.
You don't have to shove your opinion down their throat, because quite frankly, they're not ever going to change their thinking. You can't
Yeah.
make people change.
I
But
think,
you can look at my campaigns as a really good example. To say that there would ever be a Trump and a blood sign in one yard was something that I would never envision, because I have very different views than that individual. But that was because I had those conversations. I had those hard conversations. And those now to this day are some of my biggest and best supporters.
yeah.
People who thought they would never like me because I'm a Democrat or a woman. Um, so yeah, it makes my heart hurt. I talk about it a lot, because I feel that we have to fix democracy and make it so people want to get involved again. And I'm not seeing that with a lot of our younger people, and I don't blame them.
Yeah. Well, it's a very wise approach, and it's clear that listening first and caring about the people that are in your constituency is what matters to you, and that's very respectable. And one of the things that in our industry, in terms of renewables and energy, obviously fossil fuels have been such a foundational part of our economy, how we do business, how we live, the products we use. And within the last few years, the real push away from carbon dependency and carbon neutrality has caused kind of a panic. And with that panic has not come the amount of education I feel required to help people feel comfortable saying, you know, okay, I'm getting rid of fossil fuels, but when people live in California and their governor is telling them not to plug in their car, that's going to be mandated to be electric. That causes people, quite a bit of anxiety, right? How are we going to power our home, our cars, our neighborhoods if we can't, even if we're being asked to shut things off right now? So one of the things I've heard from my time in this industry is to push a new renewable energy source forward really requires a public-private partnership. It requires politicians and local officials, state officials, federal officials to, one, understand the issues, understand the opportunity, and then help, whether it's with government funding and or permitting and or access to government land where resources could be found, to be able to understand the possibility of a source, let's say geothermal, right? And then help it go forward. The thing that a lot of people don't understand with geothermal is that it does kind of stand on the backs of the oil and gas industry. You might have to drill deep enough to get the temperatures that could then power an entire city. And where solar is a great supplemental source, it can't provide the always on, they call it base load, the always on power that's needed. And so, there's only a few options. You can burn a fossil fuel, or you can use like a nuclear source or a geothermal. And there's not enough places that have water to use hydro across the globe. So although that's a good source. So a lot of it requires education, and that starts with politicians. It's kind of the top down, bottom up. And I know that's a phrase used in politics, but politicians learn about it. The people understand the pros and cons, and then, have that push. So in our industry, that's important. And as the CEO of a geothermal company, but one of the things I saw that you are a proponent for in Nebraska was applying for funds from the Inflation Reduction Act, so you could really improve the energy efficiency of homes within your constituency and jobs. So, I mean, what are your thoughts in terms of climate change, decarbonization, and really making Nebraska greener? And how do you think you can use some of those funds to do that in your area?
So Nebraska, in some ways, has fallen behind other states when it comes to like our climate action plan. Um, I'm going to start with that because I think we'll start with that and use that as the foundation to answer the rest of the questions. Um, you know, Lincoln, Nebraska, which is a community with a lot of young people, created a climate action plan before the state ever got involved. The state would never do it because they said they didn't have the money. But now, since Biden's become president, money like that has been made available. And the state has finally received funds to put together their own climate action plan. But what you may not know about Nebraska is that we've had excessive drought, excessive flooding. I live along the Missouri. I'm not right next to it, thank God, but I live in the area of the Missouri River, and we have had flash floods. Um, and we have had areas that have been wiped out more than once since I've lived here. I've lived here since '92. Um, and we've not really done a good job of planning when it comes to climate action. And now our communities and our state are finally getting on board. And one of the reasons I pushed for funds being used for homeowners is because those funds were available. And I didn't see the state reaching out for them. And sometimes we have to bring legislation forward to pull the trigger. It's not real popular with the executive branch when we are transparent and show that maybe something's not being done properly, but I don't really care. I don't work for the executive branch. I work for the citizens of Nebraska. And so I know that if we help people with funding that helps them save money, they can protect the environment, which is really important. They can reduce their utility bills. They get a really good return on their investment, not immediately, but over a long period of time. And it increases the property value. So little things like having funds available through that act can make a huge difference in someone's life. And why would we leave that money on the table? Sometimes I think in such a way that's just too common sense, because I'll be like, boy, it's pretty black and white. Why don't we want this money? And then you start working with certain government officials, and it becomes this whole ordeal and complicated when all they have to do is ask for the money, put a plan together, and give that money to Nebraskans. It's there. It's our taxpayer dollars. Do we want it to go to another state? We do not. We can't get the money back. It's already been taken out of our taxes. Why wouldn't we do it to create a CAP? Why wouldn't we do it to make people's lives better and increase their value? And what I like now that we did get funding for a CAP is that we're addressing it more to a rural area. In fact, I have a interim study this summer about that. We always talk about how ag drives our economy. I don't think I've ever heard of a politician that doesn't use that phrase in Nebraska. Ag drives our economy, and it's true. I mean, we don't have the types of recessions that they have on the East and West Coast because we have such a strong ag economy that helps us stay balanced financially. But we also know that our farmers are really the best and first environmentalists we have in Nebraska, right? They already have, believe it or not, environmental concerns, and they don't like to be told what to do. And so we walk a very fine line of like, here's what we'd like you to do. We can't make you do it. So it's all about, like you just said, education. How do we get you the money? How do we help you? How do we make sure that we accelerate climate action in a way that is responsible? Something you may not know about Nebraska is that we have Omaha Public Power District, for an example. Our utility companies are public owned, not private owned. We're the only state in the United States that has public owned utilities, which is kind of awesome, actually. Our utility rates are much lower than most states. And OPPD, the reason I bring them up is that they have a goal to be net zero carbon emissions by 2050. You might want to verify that, but I believe it's 2050. And they've repurposed methane gas at the Douglas County landfill into energy. So they have programs like the Orange Bag program, where you can put like clean styrofoam, things that can't be recycled or shouldn't be put into the landfill, that are then burned for energy. So we're really, OPPD is actually very progressive, and you're seeing our other utility companies follow suit in Nebraska. But when it comes to what we're trying to do in ag areas, if it's okay if I kind of just go into that area now.
Yes, please.
All right. I give really long answers as bad habit.
That's okay.
So, which tells you kind of how my head works too, right? So, they want to expand climate resilient ag, which makes sense, right? If we're dependent on ag, we use corn for ethanol here in Nebraska. Ethanol is very important when it comes to our economy. And so when we talk about climate resistant ag, a lot of farmers are going to be resistant. So they want to make sure that they incentivize. When you incentivize people, especially financially, they're more prone to try something. And they want to make sure that there's access to technology and certain equipment, certain seed and plant materials. This is where I've been a squeaky wheel, and I think is the future of ag, but I'm not quite there in getting people convinced yet. I believe that AI, blockchain, robots, and cobots are really the future for ag. And by the way, the answers to our workforce shortage. But boy, trying to teach 48 other senators about blockchain, I've been doing it for 7 years, and we're still not there. And then they want to adapt the grid. So they want to promote the electrical grid and transmission upgrades. And they want to put in research and develop a better reliability on things like renewable energy access and how do we integrate it. And then, of course, they have to promote soil health. That's huge. I don't know about other states, but Nebraska, we have a nitrate problem. And again, how I talk about our farmers are really our first environmentalists. They don't want the nitrates in the soils. They don't want the nitrates in their well water, because that affects their family's health. And we do have a very high rate of childhood cancer in Nebraska, and that is one of the reasons. And that's really unfortunate. And then the other thing is they want to encourage innovation. So this is what you were just kind of talking about. They're nurturing new technologies. So it can be research on things like biofuel production from crop waste, right? What is that called? Cellulosic? I think they want to regenerate the soils. They want to sequester carbon. And in the long run, by doing these things, they can support the financial stability of our farmers and our ranchers. And those are good things.
Yeah.
But if they can make the biofuel reduction from things like crop waste and municipal solid waste, that's a huge step.
Yeah.
But the things that they're working on are things like storing that carbon in soils as an example of one of the practices they might be able to use. So it's there's definitely a growing interest in conservation in Nebraska amongst our farmers in the rural areas. I see them going towards alternative energy and energy conservation. And part of that is because of fuel prices. They're like, what do we do? The fuel prices are not dependable and they've gone off the charts. And so if we have to address that, we need renewable, sustainable energy sources.
Right.
So, but if we use that, we have to conserve energy as well. So maybe we can do things like converting feedstock to biodiesel or ethanol. And you're seeing that as well.
Yeah.
We have had one black eye in Nebraska, and that was the Alt-N plant in Mead, Nebraska. Ethanol has been huge in Nebraska, but we had one bad actor who found out that they could have people bring all the waste seed corn coated with neonicotinoids to their plant and use it without having to pay for it because they became a dumping ground for it, and took in 98% of the United States waste seed corn, made ethanol with it. Ethanol creates a byproduct called wet cake. That wet cake, if not made with neonicotinoid coated corn, is usually nutrient dense, can be used to feed cattle, can be used applied to your land. This stuff couldn't. And they had, you've been to the Memorial Stadium, they had a pile of wet cake the size of Memorial Stadium in Lincoln with nothing over it, nothing under it. It got into the soil, it got into the water system, it got into the air. People have been getting sick.
Wow.
I was able to get a little bit of money to help the people of Mead for research, but we're already starting to see some long-term health effects, and it's going into the waterways heading to Nebraska's second largest city, Lincoln in Nebraska. So sometimes what I see in Nebraska is that we want to be innovative and we want to move forward, but we don't want to do the oversight that's necessary because it's big business.
Yeah.
So we actually cited that company 13 times before they got shut down. Can you imagine drunk driving 13 times? Do you think they'd let you
That's
get back on
crazy.
the road? It was crazy. You should, and I encourage people watching this, look it up. It's Alt-N, Alten, Mead, Nebraska. It's a really good example of how we get so involved in the financial aspect of it and the big business aspect of it. We even gave them, they were in arrears in their property taxes. We gave them CARES funds, CARES money. Like we let them continue polluting the environment and continue to do things that hurt people. And it wasn't until they had like a big water main break that they shut that plant down.
Wow. Yeah,
And
that's
it's
scary.
crazy. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really so the point being is that we want change in Nebraska. We're going towards change in Nebraska. And I think you see, especially a lot of our policymakers that really care about the environment are becoming educated on the choices that we have. And we do see our farms generating their own energy, and we're seeing it through wind turbines,
Yeah.
solar panels. Some are trying the digesters, and they're selling some of that excess back to the grid, which is kind of awesome, right? And then I know that there's some experimentation with like on-farm biodiesel and ethanol production. And then again, on their own, they're researching new energy-related crops because they're trying to keep the young people on the farm, right? We don't want corporate farms. We want our family farms kept whole, but we can't keep them generating income and sustainable if we don't look at the environmental issues. And the young farmers are interested in that, in alternative energy. They're interested in how can we, again, protect the environment and have a good return on the investment when we do that, and then increase the value of our farms. And again, I go back to, again, AI, blockchain, robots, and cobots. But I'm one person out of 49 senators. So
Which is rare, for a farmer, someone coming from the farming background to be focused on that. That's kind of a background I have. And I like one of the things you said, and I agree with you that farmers are typically more environmentally conscious. And that brings up my grandfather was a farmer in Idaho. And one of the things that I remember as a little boy on the farm in Idaho was, he'd open a cellar that as kids we always thought was really scary, but we'd go 20 feet down into the earth, and my grandpa would store a lot of his crops, potatoes and
right.
carrots and things. And I was like, Grandpa, why do you do that? And it wasn't until recently I looked back at that and thought, my grandpa was using the principles of geothermal storage because, he said, well, Andrew, the temperature is consistent down here all, during the frost, during the heat. And I thought it was neat that plus, yeah, farmers are very resourceful, recycling as much they can, reuse. They're finding creative ways to take their trash and turn it into compost, and then, for
Yeah.
nutrients on it. So yeah, I agree. Farmers have been doing that for a long time. And one of the things that that geothermal consistent temp, geothermal heat pumps for homes, buildings, and farms,
Mhm.
although on a smaller scale, don't cost much more, if any more than a solar system, but can provide always on, very consistent a utility for a single home or a farm, if you will. So, one of the things I'd like to do, I'm not a constituent of yours, but I'll just slowly and consistently continue to feed you information about geothermal. Not that you don't have that, but I know it can play a huge role for the rural and urban areas in terms
Right.
of that consistent energy source. And I love all the things you mentioned, and those are creative. But one thing's clear, Senator Blood, is that if you care about people, there's more we have in common than there's not in terms of political
Right.
differences, right? And the very heart of caring for someone removes so much of the fat, so much of the noise. And it's clear, like, that's what you've spent your career doing. That's what you've spent your public service doing. So thanks for sharing your background, your history, the things that you care about, the things you're fighting for your state, for your local district. I want our audience to know that it's very important to have conversations like this with our local politicians. You are one that helps influence policy and change. And without this back and forth, and again, regardless of ideology, or, we can find common ground that we want to help people. We want our communities to be better, financially stronger. We want to be safer in all forms. And I think that's a common thread among all Americans. So thanks for everything you do. And I really appreciate your time on our podcast today.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. And I appreciate you sharing some of your information with me. And I have to be honest, you're right. It's not new to me. And I actually have friends that have switched their households to that, by the way. So I think the more conversations we have, even with sometimes when it's alternatives that we don't agree on,
Sure.
we've got to have these conversations because sometimes when you don't agree with somebody, it's because you just don't have the right information.
Yeah. And like you said, let the data and the facts help educate and make those decisions, right? What does the data say, right? And if you can have that data driven approach to making decisions, one, it's easier, but two, there's a lot more justification. It wasn't just a personal opinion. It was, hey, the data showed me this might be better, right?
Exactly. And I think that's important. And it doesn't matter about your personal likes or dislikes. It matters about the science that backs the data.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're going to stay focused and watch what you're doing there in Nebraska. Watch, it's a very important state, like you said, in the ag, community in our country. We're going to follow you and see the great things that you continue to do. And, I'm a fan, and appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind words and thanks for this opportunity.
Okay. Thank you, Carol.